Seated. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to thank all those of you that have volunteered in some way, shape, or form with the Caritas guest program this year. The numbers of people who are participating as volunteers is truly overwhelming and magnificent. And I think the few areas where we didn't have anybody sign up for have now been all met after the 8:45 service with volunteers and with names. So thank you for your participation and your continued help. As many of you know, this is the year when we have more children present than at ever before. I believe at the early service, Catherine Martin said last night we had 21 children present for this year's Caritas program. And of those 21, some are under the age of 3 years, and I believe one child is about 3 months of age. With the weather coming up, especially on Tuesday night and Wednesday night, it's going to be very cold in the streets of Richmond. And it's lovely to think that we can not only use our building to house people who are homeless, but also to involve so many people such as yourselves in ministry that is actually self-rewarding. It always comes back to us when we give, that we receive much more than we've ever given. And the way in which you all minister to the people that are our guests this week is truly Christianity in action in the finest way possible. Now, having said that, let me call your attention to the gospel passage, which is appointed for today. It's in the beginning of John's gospel that we read it, but this wedding feast in Cana of Galilee, which was the first miracle that Jesus performed in his public ministry, is contained in all of the gospels. All 4 of the Gospels talk about the wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. And in order for you to get an understanding of what the text means when it says, on the 3rd day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, that means that their wedding feast, the whole ritual, the whole ceremony itself was a week-long ceremony. Depending upon the wealth of the individuals getting involved, it would be lavish with many guests or perhaps a fewer number of guests, but it was always lengthy. It was a way of living that we don't know about in this country very much, because for the most part we can find wedding celebrations to about no more than a 1-hour religious service, and then probably 4 to 5 hours at a reception. That's very standard for most of us in America, and we've gotten used to that, but it's not that way in many, many parts of the world. And I know, because I was very fortunate in my own life as a child to have, as part of our extended family, a group of people who had migrated from Italy. They were from an area of eastern Italy, and when they came over in the early 1950s, they didn't have a job. And my father learned about them and needed to employ hardworking people to help out with some cottages that my father owned on Lake Erie. And he was the very first employer of these people, and they never forgot it. They were always grateful to us. And so much so that not only did we consider them members of our extended family, as their numbers grew and they sponsored other members of their extended family from Italy into citizenship in Canada. We became a part of their family, and they became a part of ours. And when their children got older, they were about my age, many of them, when they first came over, and we grew up together. I literally remember stomping grapes with my feet in a vat when I was about 5 or 6 years of age, so that they could make wine out of that stomped grapes. And let me tell you a little secret. It was awful wine. But they made it nonetheless, and that was part of their way of being. And when weddings came about, the guest list in some cases was as many as 2,000 people. And these are not affluent people. They began a whole year in advance making things and putting them in freezers. And not only that, they planned to invite people from Italy and other parts of Canada that they knew as friends and family. And those people came and they put them up for a week. And there were parties at various people's houses. It's almost magical when I describe it, how it all happened. And at one friend's house, for example, in the bride and the groom's house from down the street, there were a Monday night party and then a Tuesday night party at another friend's house. It was just a way of celebrating a wedding that we who have grown up in America don't have any idea still exists. But when you tap into it, it's marvelous to behold. Well, I said that we were part of that extended family. And one of the things that the Italians asked us to do, and we were happy to oblige, was to have an extended party of about 30 people at our cottage on Lake Erie on a Sunday afternoon. It was always Sunday afternoon. And as these children grew up and got married, there must have been at least 7 or 8 occasions when we hosted about 30 people, some of whom didn't even speak English. And the Italians from this village in Canada came, and they had marinated veal for about 72 hours. And if I had that recipe for their marinade, I'd be a wealthy man. It was delicious. My father had built out of an oil drum a huge barbecue. It's similar to the one that we use for our own annual pig roast. And they came and they used that barbecue to the max. They put on veal cutlet after veal cutlet after veal cutlet. They came about 12 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon after we had all been to church. And boy, did they ever go to town. They included pizza that they had made out of dandelions from their lawn. And it was delicious, believe it or not. It was just an absolutely wonderful cultural, social, and even spiritual experience for me growing up. It was a gastro experience for my brother-in-law in particular, who at the time was about 6'6". He's older now and shorter. But he had a great appetite back in those days. And when they served the veal cutlets, I asked him after a period of time had passed, Jim, how many of those have you had? He said, 5 or 6. He said, they just caught my tongue. And it was a fabulous experience. In the afternoon, we played bocce ball. And they all brought their own bocce ball equipment. That's what weddings are like in other parts of the world. And so Jesus himself participated in that. At least that means that for 3 days, these people in Palestine have been coming together and celebrating with joy. Time took a different dimension upon those people. And of course it was expected that they not tend to their jobs, but they rather are invited guests to come to a wedding. Which leads me to my comparison between how weddings happen in this country and how they happen in many parts of the world. Remember that God came to this wedding, and therefore there must be something that allowed God to bless that way of living. How many of you have ever been in Midlothian to to a wedding that lasted 7 days and 7 nights. Not one of us. Now, there's something out of balance in all of that. I'm not saying that we should just simply party. That's obviously just crazy and immature. But I wonder when I read this passage if we haven't gotten things a little bit askew. You know, in all of God's wisdom, there is a commandment that says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, which means there's something sacred about putting into your lifestyle a day of rest. There's something sacred about putting a time when you can celebrate with your family and friends, whether it be a wedding feast or an occasion of a civil or national holiday. And yet the average American's working life, is so filled with work and duty and obligation that we seldom have time to celebrate. I think sometimes remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy is the most violated of all the commandments. I was astounded to learn several years ago when a study was done, an authoritative study was done of the average work week of Americans compared to average work weeks of people in other countries, that our work week exceeds by a significant amount the work week of the German people and of the Japanese people. We have this sense that somehow or another people from Germany and Japan work like crazy. It's us who are crazy to work like we do. There's something out of balance. When I'm looking forward to retirement as a time when I can restore balance in my life between work and recreation. There's something out of balance when I listen to my son and my daughter telling me that, no, that's not a good day to visit because we just have our days and weekends filled with work. What kind of a lifestyle are we passing on to our children and grandchildren? Which makes me think of two other things. Number one, religion, and particularly Christianity, but all religions as well, have to balance within their own kind of way of being, a sense of being serious about mission and a sense of allowing for play. That's why it's so important for us to have social occasions as well as times of mission work in any congregation, in any denomination. How did we get so serious about religion? At first I thought it was all because of the Presbyterians. But it's not necessarily Presbyterians. You know, my wife and I look at the BBC productions with some regularity on television. And members of the Church of England, the ordained ministers and clergy, are almost always portrayed as dour, kind of serious-minded, duty and obligation-minded. So much so that BBC television and almost all of the people in England now use the clergy as objects of kind of scorn and derision because they're so serious all the time. So it's not just the Presbyterians in Scotland. It's the Anglicans in England and perhaps elsewhere as well. Garrison Keillor talks about Father Emo and Our Lady of Perpetual Responsibility. There's got to be a balance within religion between being serious and dedicated times, but also knowing when to celebrate with one another in an appropriate way. But if that's true of us within the church, or within the churches, so it is that the church, perhaps, is the only institution left that can talk about celebrating in an appropriate way to the wider culture that increasingly is work-oriented, particularly in our culture. We talk about other kinds of diseases, and well, we should. But workaholism is one disease that is absolutely held in high regard. If you're a workaholic, the chances are probably good that you're going to be rewarded and get ahead in the organization that you live for. In other words, the wider culture rewards a sickness. Can't we do better than that? How do we go about that? How do we go about freeing people up to work and work productively, but not to overwork? I mean, does the thought not occur to you as it occurs to me that it's just common sense to have perhaps fewer work hours and more people trained to work less hours? Would that not reduce the unemployment rate? I mean, there are some things that we have to be creative about. And that's perhaps just one small example that would free us up. After all, I think Jesus certainly would agree in the statement that we work to live, not we live to work. If we live to work, there's something wrong with us. How many of us come from families where our own fathers had this model of going out and their job was to work, and we never saw them? How many people have been wounded in their spirits by being raised with that model? And if you think I'm picking on fathers, believe me, I know plenty of women today who are equally guilty of workaholism. Celebrate is what the scriptures say. I mean, Jesus and his entourage, his disciples, were at a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Ed, what I'm saying, I hope doesn't upset you that much. But Ed is experiencing new life as a result of his own recent retirement. Has it come down to that, really? Let's look for creative ways where we can join Jesus at the wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. And who knows, we might find that the water has been turned into wine in our lives.